While episode 7 feels more like a leisurely stroll than the roller coaster that episode 6 was, this episode definitely has a lot more of that Star Wars feel that we've all been missing. Hi y'all, Snarky J Cosplay here. Disney Plus treated us to the 7th episode of Andor this morning, and I've gotta say, I am completely committed to the pacing of this series as of right now. For the non-spoiler part of my review, I'm giving this episode a solid 8 out of 10. Yes, this is a far drop from the edge-of-your-seat, action-packed thriller that was episode 6. But this episode doesn't feel as long, and it definitely didn't drag as hard as episode 5 did, for instance, which was actually my lowest rating so far, and even that episode got a 6. Like we've mentioned ad nauseum, seriously, it'd be dangerous to make this a drinking game. This is a slow burn show, and we've learned from the showrunners that this is basically a 3-episode at a time set, meaning that the first 2 are going to be the build-up, and the 3rd episode is going to be the huge explosion. So episode 7 is definitely us starting to do that build-up again, and I for one really enjoyed it. There was a lot of political tension in this one, a lot of heartfelt, more human moments between the different characters. And there are so many more elements of Star Wars in this episode that I definitely felt like I was getting sucked back into the universe. I've said in a couple of my previous reviews that this just feels like a war drama that happens to maybe take place in the Star Wars universe, but this episode definitely firmly plants us back in that Star Wars universe, and I'm absolutely loving it. We've got some pretty cool Easter eggs that I want to point out as well. I give episode 7 of Andor a rating of 8, and with that being said, let's get into it. From this point on, there will be spoilers for episode 7 of Andor. You've been warned. Once again, this episode is split up into several different storylines. We get snippets of what exactly former Deputy Inspector Cyril Karn is up to. We get little bits and pieces of what's happened to our rebel friends since that mission on Aldhani. Of course, we also get to follow our not-so-heroic hero Cassian as he makes his way back to Ferrix. And there's also some huge political stuff happening here, both with the ISB and our friends on the other side, Mon Mothma and Luthen. So let's kick this one off with our friends at the ISB. Since the rebel attack on that garrison on Aldhani, things have gone to hell in a handbasket. We get this really menacing speech about tightening the Empire's grip on the galaxy by none other than Colonel Yularen. This is our first Easter egg. Colonel Wolf Yularen fought in the Clone Wars, and he actually was really big on the front lines of those wars. After that, he actually became one of Emperor Palpatine's closest advisors. We also know that he is destined to become nothing more than dust, because in 5 years' time, he will be a bridge officer on the Death Star when it gets, you know, blown up. So basically, the Empire is putting a ton of insane measures in place, and it's basically real wartime stuff. They're imposing taxes, they are canceling festivals and events that could be used to cover rebel activity, they're reevaluating prison sentences for the worse. This is gonna come in handy later. And Emperor Palpatine calls for an emergency Senate so that the ISB can have free reign over search, seizure, and surveillance. However, our favorite hard-ass Dedra Meero isn't exactly satisfied with this result. She feels that the ISB is making a huge mistake in treating the attack on Aldhani like a robbery instead of an announcement of rebel events to come. She takes it upon herself to have somebody look through all these records and give her all the data from every star system that's ever had some kind of Imperial stuff be stolen. That way she can start tracking and developing a pattern between rebel activity and pieces of Imperial tech that have been stolen. Naturally, when she makes this request for information, she asks for discretion, but it's Star Wars, so it doesn't work out the way she wants. The next time we see her in an ISB meeting with Major Partagaz, her colleague slash bane of her existence, Blevin, decides to launch a formal complaint against her in the middle of the meeting. Things don't exactly go according to Blevin's plan, though. Meero defends herself brilliantly and tells Major Partagaz, hey, you know what? The system changes or it dies, and she's kinda right. She announces that through links she's formed between stolen tech and rebel activity around the galaxy, she has found evidence of a rebel alliance forming against the Empire. He's so impressed, in fact, that because of her interest in Ferrix, he allows her to have jurisdiction over Morlana 1, which shuts Blevin up pretty quickly. He moves on with the meeting, and we get yet another Easter egg in this episode. The planet Ord Mantell is mentioned to be under the jurisdiction of one of the officers. Ord Mantell is a mid-rim planet that also serves as the capital of the Bright Jewel Oversector. The planet has a huge underworld and actually made an appearance in season 1 of The Bad Batch. Additionally, one of the most famous planets in Star Wars is also part of the Bright Jewel oversector. Yavin 4, which happens to be the home of the Rebel Alliance, is in that same oversector that Ord Mantell is part of. That's where we leave off with the ISB, and surely Supervisor Dedra Meero having all the unlimited access to Ferrix that she's been wanting since the beginning is gonna spell trouble for our friend Cassian. On the other hand, we've got Mon Mothma and Luthen carefully navigating the seas of diplomacy after that attack on Aldhani. Luthen's radio notifies him and us that the ISB is not only questioning the people of Aldhani, but they've actually taken over 100 people into custody with accusations of having helped the rebels do what they did. Mon Mothma arrives without having called, and the two begin to dance around the topic of whether or not Luthen had anything to do with what happened on Aldhani. He eventually gives in and tells her, yeah, that was me. The network was in place and it was time to set things off. While she's really upset and tells him, hey, I'm doing my best, he seems like he's half past done with her, because it seems like her best is just trying to bring more people into the situation to get more cash, and that's not what Luthen wants. She's really upset though, because at this point in the timeline, she's not quite as militant as we know she's gonna become. She's still the diplomat, she's still part of the Senate, and she very obviously doesn't want people to get hurt, which at this point Luthen seems not to really care about. He says people are gonna have to suffer, they've gotta force the Empire's hand. He mentions that they almost don't feel themselves being choked out by the Empire anymore, and it kind of reminded me of that saying where if you put a frog in boiling water immediately, it'll jump out, but if you turn up the heat slowly, it won't move. I really don't know who the heck would make that up, like why are you boiling frogs to begin with, but it's a great metaphor for this, and we see that he's obviously trying to force the Empire to do enough crazy stuff to continue getting people involved in the rebellion. It's brilliant tactics, and it feels very real world for Star Wars. It's definitely too real world for Mon Mothma, who leaves, and the next time we see her, she's got that dinner party that was mentioned in one of the prior episodes going on in her home. She's talking to an old childhood friend of hers who we learn is named Tay Kolma. Despite an interruption from her daughter Lita, Mon Mothma manages to get Tay far away enough from the party to start asking for his help. He says that he's unlikely to help anything politically because he's more than wary of the Empire, and that lets her know that this is the guy for the job. Now, there's another Easter egg in this conversation. Mon Mothma tells Tay that there's only 3 people in the whole galaxy that know exactly what it is that she's up to. We can assume 2 of them are Luthen and the gal that he works with, and that means that it is super likely that the 3rd person involved is Bail Organa. She tells Tay that she needs him to go along with this plan, that she's gonna be forming a Chandrillan charitable outreach program. Try saying that 3 times fast, I'm not even gonna do it. Anyways, this outreach program would be yet another irritation for the Empire. So the plan is to make Tay the chairman of this program, and basically he's gonna help her get access to her family's funds so that she can continue to funnel money into the rebellion without the Empire getting too curious. She won't tell him the whole story, but it's clear that these two are gonna have way more going on in the future. Now, on Coruscant, we're introduced to a mysterious new character who's definitely an ally of Luthen. She's a woman in a mysterious red cloak, and when we first meet her, she's walking through an arrival terminal on Coruscant. Here's another Easter egg. As we see her walk through that terminal, this is the first time we see stormtroopers in this entire show. It's honestly been super weird seeing this kind of series without any stormtroopers this far into it, but honestly, I was super excited to see them because when they popped up, I was like, yes, this is Star Wars. Now we follow her as she makes this little rendezvous with none other than Vel, who now looks completely different. Her hair is laid out real nice, her clothes are clean. She seems to have definitely gotten a makeover since she left Aldhani. Now, Vel seems pretty pissed off that Luthen didn't show up to meet her himself, and we learn that this woman in the red cloak is the one who recruited Terramin, and she seems pretty cold about his death as well as the deaths of Gorn and Nemik. However, she doesn't even mention Skeen, and when Vel questions her on that, she mentions that Luthen actually had his doubts about him the whole time. Cassian, of course, comes up in conversation, and bad news for him, Vel is basically sent to kill him because he's a loose end. They don't need one more person out there knowing exactly what Luthen is all about. As far as other rebel allies are concerned, we do get some shots of Cinta wandering around Aldhani. She's gotten like a land speeder and she's making her way through the mountains, but we don't actually know what she's up to yet. I'm definitely curious to see what's gonna happen with this character, you know, because she got like left behind behind after this whole huge thing, and now everybody in Aldhani is being treated like an accessory to robbery, but I guess that remains to be seen. Let's get into what our not so heroic hero, Cassian Andor, has been up to. When we meet up with him in this episode, he is making his grand return to Ferrix, and by grand return, I mean he's sneaking back into his house. It's here that we find out from Marva that the entirety of Ferrix is now under Imperial authority and everybody's looking for him. Additionally, everybody knows that Tim was the one to turn him in. Marva seems honestly a little hopeless, and she tells him that the Empire is here to stay. We get a really tender moment here though between her and Cassian, because Cassian is desperate for her to come with him. He's telling her they'll leave in the morning, they'll take the droid, and they'll all get out. And I really like the character development that we're seeing here, because as cold and kind of grimy as we've seen Cassian be so far, he's really actually tender and obviously cares about his mom a lot. So it definitely just adds more layers to a character that seems pretty complex as it is. Marva reluctantly agrees that they'll leave first thing in the morning, and later that night, Cassian goes to meet with his friend Bix. Bix is not happy to see him, and she's super insistent that he get out because she knows that anybody in town will turn him in. The town blames him for the Empire's presence on Ferrix, so he's not exactly a popular character here right now. It's a really unfriendly conversation. Cassian tries questioning Bix a little bit more about Luthen. She insists that she's got no information for him. He gives her enough cash to pay off all his debts on Ferrix, and he leaves, having to take care not to be spotted by stormtroopers. In the midst of this, we see flashbacks to Cassian's adolescence, where we see clone troopers marching on Ferrix, and that flashback ends with those clone troopers aiming rifles at Cassian's adoptive father, Clem. Here's another Easter egg, but also something that I think might be a continuity error. In this flashback, the troopers we see aren't actually stormtroopers, they're clone troopers. But based on how old Cassian was when the Republic was falling, and how old he is in this flashback, by now we can assume that the Empire has pretty much entirely replaced the Republic. So wouldn't the troopers walking around be stormtroopers and not clone troopers? Let me know your thoughts. He makes his way back home, and in the morning, Marva tells him that she is not going with him. He's confused. He doesn't know what the heck she's got left to do on Ferrix, but she says that she's staying because of the rebellion. In this tense conversation between her and Cassian, we hear that Clem was actually hanged in the square on Ferrix, presumably after that flashback occurred. She says that she's avoided that square ever since, but she says if the rebellion is brave enough to take on the Empire, then she is brave enough to stay on Ferrix and not run. This is another really great moment between Cassian and his adoptive mother, Marva. She tells him she loves him, but that she can't go and he can't stay. And before he's gotta go, she tells him to stop looking for his sister, which I was actually glad that this storyline got mentioned again. The last time we heard about Cassian looking for his sister was episode 1, so I'm really glad that this storyline is making a resurgence, and I'm curious to see where it goes. Anyways, Marva tells him that there were no survivors on Kenari, that he should let it go and stop asking around for her. Cassian doesn't say anything to that regard though, he just tells her that he'll come back for her, and she says she knows. The next time we see him, he's giving me beach envy on some kind of planet called Niamos. It looks like he's at a resort, and while he's pretending to take a shower, he's stealing cash from a woman who is in bed and calling him Keith. He heads out, supposedly to the store, but he gets stopped by a shore trooper. Here's another couple of Easter eggs. On Niamos, we see shore troopers, a KX unit droid, a whole lot like K2SO from Rogue One, and we also see probe droids, which goes to show us that the Empire's already in full swing. They said that they were going to be stepping up measures, and they've already done it in a big way. Because if this resort-looking town is already this packed full of Imperial activity, I can only imagine what the rest of the galaxy looks like. The shore trooper hassles him because unfortunately for Cassian, he is in the wrong place at the wrong time. He's sort of in the midst of some guys that seem to have been pickpocketing, and so he actually gets detained and arrested. When he's in court, he's charged with anti-imperial speech, fleeing the scene of anti-imperial activity, and like a bunch of other stuff. This whole list, according to the judge, would actually amount to a 6-month sentence. But remember earlier when I said that they were reevaluating prison sentences? Yeah, Cassian gets sentenced to 6 years. And the last time we see him, he looks shocked and very upset that this is happening to him. Now, maybe the most mundane part of this entire episode, but actually the one that I have so many questions about, is our good friend, former Deputy Inspector Cyril Karn. He's still at his mom's house, and what I find interesting is that if you look closely at his room, he's actually got some action figures in there. I can't imagine just putting a bunch of nerdy shit in your room. So his mom apparently called in that favor with Uncle Harlow, who we still have no idea who that is specifically. Apparently, the infamous Uncle Harlow has scored Cyril an interview with the Bureau of Standards. Now, when he gets there for the interview, we actually see that the Bureau of Standards is the world's most depressing office. It is dystopian looking, just a sea of gray cubicles. It looks like my personal hell. The interview seems to be going pretty well, but he eventually asks about Morlana 1. Cyril gets real uptight about it and tells him that, hey, you know what? I did what I did because I think it's important to uphold the law, and I got punished just for doing my job, which is a gross understatement, but this actually works because the interviewer tells him, hey, you know what? We'll just edit your record, and he decides to offer him a job anyways. And the next time we see Cyril, he's actually sitting at his desk, but he's got this really unsatisfied look on his face, and I doubt it's because he misses his mom's harassment all day. It's definitely because he's still thinking about the incident on Aldhani, which he heard about on the news. And that's pretty much everything that happens in this episode. So no, it's not this action-packed episode. It's definitely not the edge of your seat tension that we got in the last one. But I think that there's something to be said for this slow burn, tension building stuff in all of these other episodes. It's definitely full of political drama, nuanced dialogue, and I have to say, I loved the human elements in this episode. I know a lot of people maybe don't have the attention span for it or are just gonna find it kind of mundane, but I personally really enjoyed this episode. And more than that, I'm really stoked to be seeing aliens and droids and stormtroopers all over again. I feel like I am back home with Star Wars. That's all from me. I've been Snarky J. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know your thoughts on episode 7 of Andor in the comments below.